Star Walker Studios presents Game Master's Journey, your multi-dimensional RPG podcast. Running a game requires a lot of creativity and thinking on your feet. So what do you do when you're out of ideas? Today, I set off again on the Obsidian Monolith to share 3 resources that can help you out when your creative well has run dry. These products can be invaluable to you during your prep and even during play. So join me on the journey. Together, we can become game masters truly worthy of the title. Hello, listener. Greetings, fellow GM and or player. Welcome to episode 69 of Game Master's Journey, your multi-dimensional RPG podcast. I'm your host, Lex Starwalker, and I'm transmitting to you today from the Obsidian Monolith somewhere outside time and space. First off, today at the top of the show, I want to send a big shout out and thank you to Steven Strickland, who is the most esteemed first 5th tier patron for Star Walker Studios. So thank you very much, Steven, for supporting this show and all the shows that we make. And if you too enjoy Game Master's Journey and you'd like this show to keep going and you'd like to give your support, then check out our Patreon page at patreon.com/StarWalkerStudios. So first off, I just real quickly in regards to my most recent episode, my GM 101, I've gotten a lot of feedback already on that episode. I've heard from a lot of people that are enjoying the episode and really happy that I'm doing that series and looking forward to more episodes on that topic. And I've already also gotten quite a few questions and requests for future things to talk about in that series of episodes. So I'm going to get to work on producing the next GM 101. So I just wanted to let you know that I am going to be doing more of those. And again, if you have any questions about starting out as a GM or GMing in general, shoot me an email, gamemastersjourney@gmail.com, and let me know. So today I am going to review 3 products that I have received. I received review copies of these products from the publishers, and I want to talk about them today. And these are pretty cool because they are products to help you as a GM prepare for your games, and they are not connected to any particular system. They're pretty generic so that whatever kind of game you're running, they can be useful to you. And this is awesome, because obviously, if you're running an established game with a large line of products, then, there may be some products in that game line to help you as a GM. But it's really great to have these products that are kind of more generic system-wise so that not only can you use them with any game that you happen to be running, but if you're a GM who runs a multitude of different games, you can use them in all of them. Also, I want to thank the people who have recommended these products to me. All of these I found out about either from listeners of the show writing in and telling me about them, or people that I had as guests on the show telling me about them. So if you're one of the fine people that suggested one of these products to me, thank you for bringing them to my attention. So the first one I want to talk about today is called Eureka, 501 Adventure Plots to Inspire Game Masters. And this is from Engine Publishing. And I want to thank Martin Rauya for sending me the review copy of this book so I could talk about it today. So this is a black and white softcover book. The cover price is $35. You can currently get it on Amazon as well as from Engine Publishing itself. And what this book is exactly what the title says. It's 501 adventure plots that you can use in your game. So each of these plots take up about a half of a page of the book. And the book is grouped into 3 genres: fantasy, sci-fi, and horror. So each of these genres, they have a whole bunch of adventure ideas for you. Now, I think this book is the most useful if you're a GM who runs different games in different genres. I think if that's you, you're going to get the most out of this book of all the GMs out there. However, you can reskin these plots for other genres, and the book does give you some advice on how to do that. So even if you're only running a fantasy game, you can still get some use out of the sci-fi and horror plots. But, again, if you're running just one game, then about a third of the book is going to be really targeted at whatever genre your game is in. But with, some more work and some more effort on your part, you can get use out of the other 2/3 with reskinning. So the book starts out with some guidelines on how to use the plots and also how to insert them into a campaign that you already have going and kind of how to fit them into what you've already got going on. And again, gives guidelines on reskinning the plots for different genres of games. Each plot has tags and themes associated with it to help you find the kind of thing that you're looking for. Obviously, in a book with 501 plots, organization is very important. And this book has some really cool tools to help you find the plot that you're looking for. And those tools include a variety of indexes in the back of the book. So for instance, there's an index of plots by genre. So if you just want to look at the sci-fi plots, you can go check out that index. And there's an index of plots by tag. So tags are basically keywords that might tell you the challenge of the plot, the types of enemies involved, the play style that works well with the plot, the setting of the plot, and things like that. So you can browse through the index looking for tags that seem interesting for you or seem to fit what you're looking for. Or if you are just perusing the plots and you find one that you kind of like, or you want some that are similar, the tags can help you find those. Now, the themes are pretty broad and they're based on dramatic situations, things like abduction, conflict with a god, self-sacrifice for an ideal, things like that. So if you have something particular in mind as far as an encounter that you're looking for, and you can associate it with one of those, I think it's 36 themes, then you can find plots that are geared around that theme. So there's a few of these tools between the indexes and the tags and the themes and the genres to kind of help you find what you're looking for. Now, another thing is in the index section, there's a plots by genre index, and this goes into subgenres of horror, sci-fi, and fantasy. So things like cyberpunk, grim and gritty fantasy, stuff like that. So again, this can kind of help you focus in on the plots that will fit your game the best without having to do a bunch of reskinning. So I think a product like this can be a lot of help when you're just stuck and you just need some ideas. Even if you don't end up using one of these plots, there's a good chance that one of them will help you to have your own idea of something that you want to do. I do think that this book is more useful to GMs who have some experience as a game master already. Not to say that a new GM couldn't get value out of this book, but for a new GM, I'd recommend looking for adventure ideas and sources from the actual game you're running, because this book doesn't have any systems or mechanics in it whatsoever. So for a new GM, depending on what game you're running and how complicated your game is, it may be a little more challenging to use one of these without any kind of mechanics given. So, if you're brand new, see what you can find for your actual game, because that will include the mechanics and things that you need. But if you feel confident that you can take a general kind of literary description of a plot and make that work in your game and come up with whatever mechanics you might need for that, then go for it. And also, reskinning these to another genre or to fit your game isn't usually terribly hard, but it does require some more in-depth knowledge and understanding of your game's mechanics and a little more effort on your part as GM. So again, if you're brand new to GMing, that might be a little bit more than you want to try to bite off right at the beginning. But as you get some more experience, this will be very useful to you. Now, personally, I think this book is most useful to use during session prep, as opposed to trying to use it on the fly while you're actually running a session. Each plot is half a page, so it's too much. Like, you're not going to be able to just quickly skim that during play without bringing your game to a screeching halt to try. Much rather if you have to look at multiple ones, so try to find one that fits, right? At the very least, you're going to have to take a break to work it out. So, I wouldn't recommend trying to use this during play unless, you take a break and then, you can do it then because your players aren't going to enjoy sitting at the table watching you read this book. But I would recommend using it during your prep. So, the way I personally plan on using this book is when I'm sitting down to prepare for a game and maybe I just don't have any ideas, or maybe I just don't have any ideas that I really like as far as what to do next. I can use this book and either maybe find something in there that will work that I can use, or find something in there that inspires my own idea of what I can do for that session. So that's something I'm thinking about doing. I have a couple D&D groups going now, and I'm thinking about it, at least every once in a while, just trying to grab one of these and build a session around it and see how it works. So if I do that, I'll report back to you. Now, I will say there is a tiny amount of artwork in this book, a very, very small amount, just black and white, line art for the most part. It's not great. And, like I said, this is covering 3 genres: fantasy, science fiction, horror. It's 501 plots. The book is over 300 pages long. And it's $35 for a softcover book, which personally I think is pretty salty for a softcover book that isn't even in color. And you could be in a situation where only a third of this book is useful to you, which makes $35 even harder to swallow. So personally, I would have much rather seen this done as 3 separate books, one for each of the genres. And then the books could have been smaller, they could have been cheaper, and maybe we could have had some more artwork and had better artwork, and maybe, some color would have been nice. Although honestly, for this book, the art and the color isn't really, you don't really need it. And in a way, it could almost be a liability because, again, it's trying to be generic and work in any game. And as soon as you start throwing art in, it kind of makes it a little less generic, if you know what I mean. So, I would have liked to seen it split into 3 books. I think the price tag could have been more manageable that way. And then you could have gotten what you want, right? Because if you're running D&D and you're doing fantasy, then you don't really maybe have any need for horror or science fiction, right? And yeah, you can reskin them, nothing saying that you can't, but there's 167 plots for each of the genres. So, if I could have gotten a book of just 167 fantasy plots and maybe, it's quite a bit less than $35 for the book, I think I would have really appreciated that. But, if you're wanting something like this huge tome of ideas, and especially, like I said, if you're a GM who runs numerous games of different genres, then I think the book will be very useful to you. So next up is another product that can help you with ideas for encounters or plots. So the Eureka book calls it plots. They're basically, well, it's more than an encounter, but it's basically like an adventure, right? It's something that you could build like a one-shot or maybe even a longer adventure on, depending how much you want to do with it. So the next product is Encounter Decks 3, and this is by Inkwell Ideas. And this product is just encounters. And it's in a deck of cards. I want to thank Joe Wetzel for sending me a review copy of the Encounter Decks 3. And this is $12 for the physical cards from Inkwell Ideas. I'm not sure what the shipping runs on that. or $3 for a PDF. Now, personally, I don't know. I know people who buy PDFs of cards and use them. So that might be useful to you. Personally, I don't see the use in a PDF of cards. You know, the kind of the design behind this product is that they're cards that you can shuffle and randomize and things like that. So unless you're going to print out the PDF and cut it out and laminate it, at which point you probably spent more than $12 anyway. I don't know. I don't see really the point in the PDF, but I know some people use them. So there you go. As far as the physical quality of the cards, they're kind of on par with like Magic cards, though they're a bit more slippery than that. They're not as nice as like if you buy a deck of like poker playing cards. They're not that nice, but they're, you know, they're about what you expect, I think. So these, like the last product, uses genres. These are divided into science fantasy and swords and sorcery. So what this is it's a deck of cards, and each card on the back has a map for the encounter, and on the front has the information of the encounter. Each encounter has a title and it has a number. So even though they're cards and you know, maybe you're going to be shuffling them to find encounters randomly, if that's your kind of thing, you can still, you know, theoretically find one you're looking for if you remember the number. Of course, the first time you shuffle that deck, they're not going to be in order anymore, right? As far as the genre, science fantasy and swords and sorcery, personally, I think this was kind of a weird choice. I'm not sure why they chose those two genres, because, I mean, first of all, swords and sorcery is a subgenre of fantasy, which seems a little too focused for a product like this. And science fantasy just isn't that popular, I didn't think. For like, if you're only going to cover two genres, I would think science fiction and fantasy would have been a better way to go. And the two genres, as they're defined in the cards, are very interchangeable. In fact, to me, it seemed like some of the science fantasy ones that I read seemed more like fantasy to me than science fantasy. And some of the swords and sorcery ones seem more like science fantasy to me. So I don't think they did a great job with the genres and making those distinct. They're kind of samey between the swords and sorcery and science fantasy. It would have been a lot better either just to do all fantasy and had some that are more science fantasy than others, or do like science fiction and fantasy and do them as separate decks. But they work, and you know, it's like, you know, if you're running like a fantasy game and you don't want any kind of science fantasy feel or any kind of Magitech feel, then a lot of these you're going to have to do some reskinning to make them work. Because like I said, even the swords and sorcery one seems to kind of have that feel to them, a lot of them. But you can do that. So yeah, I think it would have been better as two separate decks and had more defined or more separated genres for those. But the overlap is nice in that chances are you can make any encounter from the deck work for your game if it's fantasy or science fantasy. But it's also going to result in some encounters that don't really fit your game as written, even though maybe it's supposed to be in the same genre. So as I said, each card on one side is a map and on the other side is a description of the encounter. The inclusions of maps is a big plus. And so this is something that the last product, Eureka, didn't have maps. So this, you know, if you're playing something like D&D or, you know, Pathfinder or any other game where maybe you're using miniatures or you're using maps, it will be very nice to have a map for the encounter. Now, I will say that the maps themselves vary pretty widely in quality. It's all, you know, line art. It's nothing like super special. Most of them are pretty decent, but some of them are kind of bad. They look like something that I might draw myself on graph paper, and I can't draw. So personally, I would have preferred better maps and maybe a little more effort on some of the ones that look like something I drew myself. But having the map is a big plus, and I haven't looked at the previous two encounter decks, but my understanding is that in the previous decks, the map on the card did not correspond with the encounter on the card. which to me just seems like a huge oversight. But this one, Encounter Dex 3, the map actually correlates to the encounter. So I would definitely recommend getting this one. I think it sounds almost kind of pointless to have a map on the card that doesn't have anything to do with the encounter on the card. So I would definitely get Encounter Dex 3 and not 1 or 2 so that the map's relevant to what you're looking at. So on the information side of the card, it has a title, it has the genre, swords and sorcery or science fantasy, for whatever that's worth. And then after the genre, it will have a few like keywords of kind of what this encounter involves, like pirates or occult, things like that. Then you have a quick like 1-sentence description, kind of overview of the encounter. And then you have a section called Getting the PCs Involved, which will have a few hooks of how to get the PCs into this encounter. And I think this is really cool and really nice to have, especially for newer GMs, because sometimes deciding how to get the PCs involved in the encounter you want to run can be really difficult, especially when you're new. So I really like that they include that. They then have the encounters themselves, and it's not just one encounter. It's like a few encounters on each of these. So like the Eureka, it's more than just a single encounter. It's an adventure idea. It's something you could base a session or even more than a session on. And then you have a section, follow-up adventure ideas. So this is really cool too. So if you as a GM want to do more with this encounter and continue with it, it'll give you some ideas for that. And it's also great if maybe you run the encounter and your players just really are engaged by it and you want to do more with it. So I really like that they add that. So this is a deck of cards as opposed to the last product, which was a book. So there's pros and cons associated with that, right? So if you wanted to select an encounter at random for some reason, it'd be really easy to do that. You just shuffle the cards and select an encounter. Pretty easy. However, because it's a deck of cards, it is, I feel, a lot less useful as a reference, because although the cards are numbered, if you are shuffling them or randomizing them, the numbers aren't going to help you at all. And, you just kind of have to flip through them and look through all these encounters to find one that you like. Unlike Eureka, there's no index or any way to really know what's in there or to organize it or anything like that. So personally, I would have preferred that this included a table that I could roll on and not even be a deck of cards. Like I think the deck of cards doesn't really work for this. I think I'd rather have it in a book with a table I can roll on, which would also serve as a list of the encounters with the keywords and whatnot. So I can actually find something I'm looking for if I'm looking for something more specific. So I think that the card nature of this product makes it mainly useful if you want to generate encounters randomly. So if that's what you want to do, I think this product's really good for that. But for like the way I run games, it's not nearly as useful as Eureka because it's not organized at all. So I have to flip through 54 cards looking for an encounter that I want to use, instead of being like, oh, I want an encounter that's kind of has a horror theme, or I want an encounter where the PCs have to stop a thief or something like that, where in Eureka I could find a list of encounters that are like that and then, choose from those. So this doesn't have that. And I don't know. For me, it's hard to imagine just like during gameplay, I'm just going to draw one of these cards and do whatever the card says and just completely on the fly come up with this totally random encounter. That's going to be a lot of work to try to fit that at all into what's going on with the campaign so that it feels like something other than a completely random encounter. So if you're looking for ideas for random encounters and you want a way to randomly generate encounters, then I think this is a great way to go. Also, it's system neutral, so there's not going to be any kind of stats on here or anything like that, which kind of makes it seem like it would be difficult to use on the fly, which again makes me question the decision to do it as cards. I've flipped through these, I've looked through these, and definitely some creative and cool ideas. I guess one upside of this product is the Eureka book is pretty big. Like, I wouldn't take that with me somewhere, right? If I'm going to go on the bus or something, I'm not going to take the Eureka book with me unless I want to wear a backpack, right? Where these cards, you could grab a handful of these and put them in your pocket. So they are portable, which is nice. And, if you are going to use them at the table and you don't run your game at home, then they're going to be a lot easier to take to wherever you're running your game than a book like Eureka would be. So there's that. So there you go. There are 2 products that you can use to come up with ideas for adventures. So if you're planning a session and you're running a game later this week and you just don't know what to do, you don't have an idea for an adventure that you like, I think either one of these products will be helpful for you. You'll either find something that you just want to use the way it is, or something you can reskin, or something that just gives you an idea of something of your own that you can do. So the third product I want to talk about today is also by Engine Publishing. So this is the same publisher that did Eureka. And this one is called Mass 1000 Memorable NPCs for Any Role-Playing Game. So this is very similar to the first product, Eureka, that I talked about. Only instead of giving you a bunch of ideas for encounters, this is giving you a bunch of ideas for NPCs. So like the other book, this is a $35 soft cover. It's black and white. And this one divides the NPCs into 3 genres: fantasy, sci-fi, and modern. So I think it's interesting because Eureka was fantasy, sci-fi, and horror, and this is fantasy, sci-fi, and modern. So it's interesting that they're not the same. Maybe horror fits under modern, or maybe just they realize not many people play horror games. I don't know. So a few of the NPCs are illustrated with black and white line art, but most of them aren't. The art is okay. Personally, I would have preferred a book with fewer NPCs. I mean, do I really need 1,000? Probably not. But have all of the NPCs illustrated with good full color art, because that would be very useful to me as a GM to be able to show the PCs a picture, a good picture of what this NPC looks like. Now, that could infringe a little bit on the generic nature of the book, but I don't really think so. I mean, fantasy's fantasy. As long as you're not using coats of arms or anything like that, or religious symbols or anything like that, if you have an illustration of a fantasy person, you could put that person in pretty much any world, unless there's some kind of race that doesn't exist in that world. But they could have made them all human. And the assumption in the book is that all these NPCs are human because most games have humans as a race. So, if you want to make this particular character something other than human, then you're going to have to do some tweaking. So yeah, kind of like the previous book, I personally would have rather had 3 separate books, one for each genre, with actual illustrations. Now, Eureka, I don't think the lack of illustrations was really a big downside, but with this book, it definitely is. So the book begins with advice on creating unique NPCs for your game, and some thoughts on reskinning the NPCs from one genre to another. So again, like the other book, if you're only running one game, like say you just run Pathfinder, then a third of this book will probably be pretty useful to you, all the fantasy characters, but the sci-fi modern 2/3 of the book may be more or less useful to you, depending on how willing and comfortable you are with reskinning. The book also includes traits that are used to identify the NPCs, and these are all defined in the beginning of the book. So these are things like power hungry, leader, magical, stealthy. So these are useful for finding, particular types of NPCs or NPCs with particular traits that you need for your game. Each NPC entry includes a physical description, which is really nice. Again, a picture is worth 1,000 words, but at least there is a description. It still amazes me how many times in published adventures, there won't be descriptions for NPCs or a picture, like neither, which seems like something you'd really need to have. Each NPC entry also includes 1 or 2 things to help you role play the NPC, which is really cool. And these are really short and succinct, which is nice because as a GM, I don't want to have to read a paragraph to know how to roleplay this NPC, like a sentence at most, just a few qualities to bring out as I roleplay them, which is nice. Also tells you the personality of the NPC, their motivation, what they want, which is something you need to have, their background, and some of the traits that I mentioned. Each NPC is about a quarter of the page, so I think you could fairly easily use these NPCs on the fly while running a game. As far as, I'm using this NPC, I can just look at it in the mass book and very quickly scan what I need and use that NPC right now. At the back of the book, there is an index of the traits, so you can look for specific traits and find the NPCs that have those traits, which I think will be very helpful in finding the NPCs that you want to use. There's an appendix with NPC groups, which is really cool. So for an example, in fantasy, we have the group of elite thieves, and we have a group of the rival adventuring party. In sci-fi, we have the assassination team. So this is really cool if you need a group that works, to a common cause. This will tell you which NPCs from the book to use for that group, which is pretty cool. Now, like Eureka, I think that this book is going to be most useful to you during your game preparation. I mean, there are 1,000 NPCs in here, and even with the index and the keywords and everything else, trying to find the right NPC during play is going to eat up way too much time. You're not going to want to do that. However, if during your prep you make a list of NPCs from the book that you like and maybe jot down some of their keywords and think about when and where you might use them, and you have that list handy, then I think it would be very easy to grab one of those NPCs out of the book and just run it on the fly without really preparing the NPC, as long as you don't need any game stats. Obviously, there's no game stats in this book, so if it's going to be a situation where you need mechanics for the NPC, then you're not going to be able to do that on the fly. You're going to want to do that during your prep. Unless, of course, you're running a game where stats just don't matter, or it's like Numenera and you just make up a number and there's all your stats. But if you're playing a game that's more mechanical, you're definitely going to want to prepare before the game any stats that you need for these NPCs. So I think of the 3 products that I've reviewed today, I think this last one, Mass, is the one that's going to be most useful to me personally. I usually don't have a problem coming up with ideas for adventures. Usually I've got something that I'm excited about, but as a GM, you have to come up with so many NPCs, and especially when you have to come up with them on the fly, it's very easy for them to be, very samey, and one thing I recommend, that all GMs do is to constantly evaluate yourself as a GM and find your weaknesses, right? And really work on strengthening those weaknesses. And, something I've realized for myself, I've said before on the show that one of my weaknesses is description. And, I've been trying to focus on doing more with description. And just as an aside, something interesting I've discovered is now that I'm running D&D in my own homebrew world, it's a lot easier to do a description, and I'm more likely to remember to do it because I'm describing this thing that I created that I know nobody knows anything about. When I was running, D&D in the Forgotten Realms, or when I was running Star Wars, I think a lot of times the reason I didn't maybe do as much description as I would have liked is because it's like, oh, well, they know what a Wookiee looks like. They know what a Star Destroyer looks like. I don't need to describe it. They already know, right? Or, they know what Waterdeep's about. I don't need to describe Waterdeep, right? So I have found that as far as the description, I feel like I'm starting to do better just because I'm running in my own homebrew world, and it's just more in my consciousness that, hey, I need to describe things. But I'm still working on that. I still see it as one of my major weaknesses as a GM. But probably, I think right now, my biggest weakness, is my NPCs. I seem to be, when I prepare adventures, I'm very plot focused. I'm very much thinking about the events that are going to happen and how those tie together, and the locations and the encounters and things like that. And sometimes I just forget to flesh out NPCs before the game, and I'm like, oh yeah, just last week, my players met the guild leader of Alondria for the Adventurers Guild, and I completely forgot to come up with anything really for her before the session. And we got to that point in the session, and I realized that the only thing I knew about her was that she was a half-elf. I knew her name, and she wore armor. And that was about it. And so that was about what I gave the players for, description and whatnot. And I don't think I role-played her terribly well because I didn't really know who this person was. And I didn't even realize until she came up in the game that I didn't know who she was. So for me, characters are definitely a weakness. One way that I can shore up that weakness is to make sure that I prepare properly and think about, what are the main NPCs that the PCs are likely to interact with this session, and make sure that I have those fleshed out so that I can make them unique and interesting characters. I think that this mass book is going to help a lot with that, because even when I do them, ahead of time and prepare them like I should, it's, it can be difficult when you have to come up with so many characters to avoid them starting, some of them starting to seem the same. So having this book of 1,000 characters that I can pull from to get ideas from, I think will be invaluable to me as a GM. And again, the nice thing about this book is it doesn't matter if I change games. So if I start running Star Wars again, or I start running Numenera, or I start running some other game, it will still be useful to me because these characters are system generic. And I think that it will be easier to reskin characters from one genre to another than it will be to reskin the encounters or the adventure plots, because people are people, right? And this book is assuming that everybody's human, so it's not even going into racial stuff at all. So really, you're just getting personality, motivations, and stuff like that, and that really kind of transcends genre, right? It doesn't really matter if it's a sci-fi story or a fantasy story. A good character is a good character, and a good character would work in either one, right? But all of these products I think are useful. I think Eureka is very useful to help you come up with ideas for new and interesting adventures, to try to get outside the box you've been in and do something totally different that you've never done before. I think it's most useful during prep as opposed to at the table. But when you're preparing your sessions, I think that book will be very useful. The encounter deck, again, will be very useful for just coming up with ideas for encounters. And again, it's not just an encounter. It's more like an idea that you could base a whole adventure on. It's very easy to randomize if that's your thing. If you want to be able to just randomly pick something until you find something you like, they'll be great for that. A little less useful as far as, finding exactly what you're looking for. But these have a map with each one. And even, I kind of poo-pooed some of the maps, some of the quality of the maps, but even the least good maps are better than nothing and shows you where things are in relationship to each other and gives you something to go by and something you can show the players as a visual aid. And finally, mass is going to be great for you during your prep to come up with NPCs, and can be used during gameplay to roleplay your NPCs, although I would definitely recommend that you figure out which NPCs you're going to use ahead of time, or at the very least have a list of ones that will work in your campaign that you've chosen ahead of time, and have page numbers or have them bookmarked or something, because it is a pretty big book, and it's going to take more time than you want to spend during play to try to find something from scratch. So there you go. Check out the show notes at starwalkerstudios.com/GameMastersJourney/69 for episode 69, and I will have links where you can go buy these books if you're interested. You can go check them out and learn more about them. So that's going to wrap it up for me for episode 69 of Game Master's Journey. If you would like to reach me and send me feedback, you can do so by email, gamemastersjourney@gmail.com. You can also follow me on Google+, just search for Lex Starwalker, and you can follow me on Twitter @Lex Starwalker. Please visit the show notes at starwalkerstudios.com/gamemastersjourney, and there you can find links to the products I discussed today. And at the bottom of the show notes, you can sign up for our newsletter, which I will send out at most once a month, just letting you know what's up with Starwalker Studios. Also at the top of the show notes, you'll see a big red join our Google Plus community button. And I really hope that you join the Google Plus community for Game Master's Journey. We have a lot of great discussion there. It's somewhere where you can talk to me about the show, or you can talk to me and all the other listeners about game mastering, playing RPGs, all that good stuff. So until next time, I hope that you have a chance to play your favorite RPG this week. I'll be back soon with another episode of Game Master's Journey. Until then, game on.
This has been a Starwalker Studios production, your source for quality gaming and hobby podcasts.
This episode's music provided by Cloudwalker, Renfield, Transboy, and Ish. Please see the show notes for more details at starwalkerstudios.com/GameMastersJourney.